Greetings! Today I'm going to talk about how I take kind of janky, terrible sounding MIDI arrangements and turn them into something a bit more realised and fat sounding. In this video I'm basically going to go through how I basically turned this into this. I'm not really sure if this is a tutorial or just me sort of talking about a Final Fantasy project that I've been working on because I want to, but I still think for anybody who's kind of like a home musician and wanting to like record stuff in Logic and make full songs that you'd be happy releasing, and also how to kind of turn those into something that you can actually play with a real band or other people, I think there'd be some pretty useful information potentially in this video for people who aren't necessarily interested in Final Fantasy music. I've just put out an album of stuff that is like this, and if you've seen any of my other videos, it's basically combining everything that I talk about and use all together, but in actual proper music that you can hear through the vessel of Final Fantasy stuff, I guess. So what exactly is the point of all of this? Well, yeah, basically as a quick introduction to this Final Fantasy project of mine, my aim is basically to create like a tribute band performing music from Final Fantasy VII, 8 and 9 live, but in some kind of more contemporary ways, combining sounds from genres like rock and metal, electronic, IDM, experimental music, sort of more modern like jazz fusion and hip hop and stuff, and kind of like smushing it all together with Final Fantasy music is kind of like the bedrock of that essentially. But yeah, the idea is to kind of like play some of the tracks in a more contemporary, techers and fun style to kind of like highlight some of the cool rhythms and like enhance some of the really cool melodies, or like some of what I think are really, really cool melodies on the soundtracks. I absolutely love the music of these games by Nobuo Uematsu, and I've always kind of wanted to do a band like this or a project like this, but I've only recently felt like I've actually really got the skills to be able to pull it off. So I am now doing it. So if you're not really like familiar with what the deal is with Final Fantasy music, here is a quick history lesson. Back in the day, PlayStation 1 discs could only store about 700 megabytes of data or so, because the Final Fantasy games were like pretty big. What that essentially meant was you couldn't store like high quality audio files like WAVs on the CD because it would just take up too much space, which was obviously needed for like the rest of the game. So to kind of like get around that technical limitation, the composer did everything as MIDI. And I think what's basically happening when you're playing the game is you're not hearing like a recording of music that you would normally traditionally expect, but it's just like MIDI files, instruments that are, I guess, are like built in to the PlayStation hardware. Long and short of what that means is on the original soundtrack there's no recorded instruments, it's all just realised with software stuff, and I absolutely love the sound of it personally. I find it really charming, and kind of I love the janky 90s MIDI rompler sound of those soundtracks. I think they have such a specific quality and texture because of like the era and the technology that they used. I don't know, somehow despite that, for me they still are quite like timeless and interesting. So, but obviously something that I just find fascinating, and obviously a lot of other people do, is like what would those sound like if they were brought to life with real musicians. And this has obviously been done a lot by orchestras and other cover musicians, but just for me personally, I've never quite heard anything kind of do it in the ways that I've imagined hearing it, and kind of taking influences from more sort of like contemporary artists than thinking about it like soundtrack music, I think is kind of the way I like to think about it. So my process for doing this, kind of starting with a janky MIDI song and turning it into a live thing, breaks down into a few steps, and I'm going to cover all of those in a little bit of detail in this video, but more separately in later videos. But this is it, just quickly kind of broken down. So part one of my process is to download a MIDI file created by somebody else for whatever song it is that I want to cover, and that will basically give me some information that I need, like some of the notes or chords for parts, and then I work out how to play things on guitar or keys myself by referencing other people's MIDI. Then essentially what I do is create a MIDI project which is just meant to emulate the original song as closely as possible without any kind of additions or alterations. So I first try and focus on getting it to sound nostalgic and like the original versions of each song pretty much as accurately as I can. Third part of it is I then start basically embellishing that with my own stuff, like adding more complicated drum parts, guitar and bass riffs, other synths, and like electronic programming and some like doomy bass sounds, just to kind of like enhance the melodies and the grooves, and I kind of create different interpretations of genres for each track, kind of depending on what the sort of emotional style of the original song is, or what the purpose of it is, I suppose. So like, for example, the opening bombing mission, I've done that in kind of more of like a metalcore style, and kind of, yeah, industrial synth sounds and stuff like that, like the sort of Doom 2016 soundtrack. And the reason for that is because that song is kind of got like this, it's got this quite sinister melody, this sinister riff that's like cycling through it in triplets, and it's like the introduction to the game. So it's meant to have this quite kind of like momentous and epic feel to it, so I've made it quite lively and more aggressive. But in other places on the album where things were meant to be a little bit maybe more like delicate or emotional, I've gone for softer genres like post-rock and hip-hop and stuff like that, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. So then basically once I finished kind of like producing the track, I then figure out how I'm going to convert that into an Ableton live session, and start basically figuring out how I'm going to make that version that I've produced performable in a live context, and I'll kind of go into that in a little bit. And then, yeah, once that's done, I basically rehearse this like mad, and then do that also with the band. We all sort of like learn it in our own time and then bring it together, and yeah.
It's on, we'll stop on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, ba, ba, ba.
First step is, as a reference, you can download MIDI files of most of these songs pretty easily from Google. So yeah, if you just do a Google search for Final Fantasy MIDI, you can find websites such as this one, like Kingdom Hearts Insider, and you will find long lists of MIDI files that are created by other fans and musicians. And they kind of vary in accuracy, and some of them are programmed a little bit strangely. And if I want to grab, say for example, Battle Theme, there's a bunch of versions here, so I'm going to try just Battle Theme 6. So this is the Battle Theme in Logic, and when you download a MIDI file and open it up in Logic like this, you can see that it basically, because of the information in that MIDI file, Logic has automatically assigned a bunch of instruments to the parts that are kind of like close or exactly what that instrument is meant to be. But you will notice, obviously, to begin with, so yeah, I mean, obviously sounds rubbish, sounds like fake, terrible MIDI that I don't think anybody would spend very much time listening to. So it's kind of cool, like it is cool the fact that you've got some of these sounds automatically assigned to it, but basically I am only using this as like a reference for getting some of the notes and what some of the parts are, because yeah, a lot of the times people don't exactly get things exactly right. For example, I know that in this MIDI version there's something wrong, so like, yeah, for example, in this bit of programming here, this section, that is wrong. That is not the melody. So what that actually does, hang on a sec, let's go to Spotify. So you can hear, like, in this version, that's like a vague kind of interpretation of what's actually happening in the proper track. So yeah, these are only sort of really useful to me as like a vague reference of what some of the parts are doing. So yeah, pretty much the way that I would start going about this is like have a listen through, and the initial thing that I would do is tidy up some of this MIDI. So it's not just like, there's a lot of like weird volume automation and stuff happening and some weird panning, and you can see that that's just basically causing my stereo out to clip and everything's just a bit mad. So, and the other thing to do is I'm going to make some decisions about what exactly I'm going to keep and what I'm going to replace. I would chuck out all the kind of like janky, terrible sounding things, or stuff that like doesn't even really need to be there. And then what I would do is basically like learn the parts by looking at the notes here, but then actually work it out on keyboard or guitar and then play it back in. The place that I am usually starting with all of these cover versions and these demo versions is the drums. So it's basically like, once I've programmed the drums as the foundation, that is going to be half my battle one, and then I'm going to use that as like my bedrock to record everything else over the top of it later. But you'll hear the way that I can program the drums will really affect kind of like the mood and the feel and like, yeah, the genre vibe of each track. I can actually really determine what that's going to be pretty much purely through the drums and how the drums are like orchestrated and performed. So I'll sort of show you what I mean by that. So I don't have an example of it for Battle Theme, but this is a little sneak preview of my upcoming Final Fantasy VIII material. I had the foresight to record myself or screen capture my entire process sequencing the drums for a cover version of Under Her Control from Final Fantasy VIII. So I've now switched to, I'm doing voiceover here just to kind of comment on this. I've recorded this footage quite a few months ago. So yeah, I'm just kind of going to do a little commentary basically over the top of it. But yeah, this is basically how I've been starting each one of these covers. So as you can hear, I kind of get the sounds of the software instruments as close as I can to the original tracks, or sort of, with this one, it's like I've got them roughly close so that they sound kind of okay, and then I start programming the drums basically. So instead of programming a loop and then stretching that out for the whole song and adding things to the different sections of the loop, I've been finding with this process I've been getting much more natural results if I program the entire song by hand on like a moment to moment basis. And I've just been finding that I can get really creative with the fills and enhancing the overall punch and the grooves of each track by sort of doing it this way. And yeah, it took me about 50 minutes to an hour to program this entire track's worth of drums, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, I just find that simple act of the initial laying down of hits is really exciting, and it's a fun creative process kind of going through the whole song and making the drum part that way, for me anyway. So yeah, the amount of time that it can take will sort of vary depending on how inspired you're feeling or how fun you think it is. But yeah, I personally don't think it'd be that interesting to watch 50 minutes or so of me doing this. So I've just done a little quick montage edit here, showing how I compare things to the original track to make sure that I'm nailing all the drum phrasings right and like getting some sort of key stuff in from the original before I add anything or divert in my own way. But yeah, if anybody would be interested in watching the entire video and just seeing my process of how I did this unedited, do let me know. But yeah, I don't imagine that would be that interesting to that many people, so I've just left that out here. So yeah, and obviously you can hear probably, like, if I play you a full example of what that sounds like, the full song with the programmed drums on it now. This really does the trick for me, and it's like half the battle won, I think, because you can hear that, like, that drum arrangement and the drum sound, it just does so much to kind of inject interest to the original arrangement and kind of keep it fresh as it moves along. But it's actually kind of like done something to bolster up those kind of, should we say, like MIDI sounds, I suppose, those cheap software instrument emulations of real things. Actually sort of, it's starting to come alive a little bit, and now as soon as I start adding in more layers of real instruments, you know, like my guitar and bass, even though this is all software instruments, as soon as I add those two quote-unquote organic things to it, it's going to suddenly really come to life. So we're going to dip back into Battle Theme now. So this is my own project file for Battle Theme, and you can see how I kind of arranged everything, and I will sort of just go through it and kind of break down what's happening with each layer, or what each thing is basically. So this is what I consider to be like unmixed. All I've got on the stereo out is a gain insert just to stop anything getting too loud and going over 0.0. So obviously at the top here you've got the drums, and these are coming from Addictive Drums, and I've talked about this in a different video. This is kind of like my baseline default kit setup that I've been using for these Cactuar Collections albums. Yeah. So I've mentioned it before, but yeah, it's got like it's mostly sounds and kit pieces that come from the metal pack, but whilst they've obviously got this rad as fuck flaming metal graphics and they look metal as fuck, I actually think they're more diverse and malleable than many of the other kits, and you can kind of make them work for a lot of different genres, in my opinion. They don't just work for metal. Like the Under Her Control part, I've literally programmed this by, you know, I don't program like a loop and then work from that way with this project. It's literally like I create a region that is the whole length of the song and then go through and pretty much click in each one of these hits individually. And I just find that like doing it that way, you make a more realistic and dynamic sounding drum part that is actually more like a real drummer, because you just don't end up copy pasting. Like when you're programming the drums on like a moment to moment basis throughout the song, I find that it gives you just this really cool ability to mess about with fills and just like play about with dynamics and stuff in a way that, not that you can't do that if you're like sat at a real kit and practicing, but I just find it very different programming drums and listening back to what the fills are doing versus actually doing it on a real kit. You know, I find I don't listen in the same way if I'm playing. So I find this like a really interesting like writing tool, even though I could probably, well, I'm actually not good enough at drums to play these parts either, but let's forget about that. Basically, again, with this song, because it's one of the ones that's quite high energy and kind of like is the battle theme, right? So it's got this quite like up tempo, high energy feel to it. And I thought it'd just be interesting to hear that done in kind of like a metalcore electronic rock vibe. And I was pretty inspired by basically like Architects and bands like Three Chap Tigers. With Architects in particular, I'm thinking of like the Tom Searle era, and I am 99.9% sure that Tom Searle was a massive fan of Final Fantasy VII. So in a way, this is sort of like my kind of like tribute to him as well as Nobuo Uematsu. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming at with this, right? As a result of that, I've also kind of arranged stuff in this track a little bit differently so that it can be played on guitars. Then you've basically got all the percussion tracks, so these aren't coming from anything special at all. These are all just like built-in Logic instruments. So if I solo, so that's the tambourine part, and yeah, like when I've been making these, I've been pretty much consistently hopping backwards and forwards between, you know, I kind of want every detail of it to be like accurate to what was going on in the original before I start adding things, and yeah, you can kind of hear. So those are the timpanis, which is also, this is all, you know, these are all just coming from Logic instruments. They don't have any plug-in processing or any compression or anything on them. These toms that are separate. I think, to be honest, yeah, these sounds in isolation would sound a little bit crap, but because they're layered in with addictive drums too, I think it's managed to blag it, and it actually kind of sounds like, that actually sounds alright to me as a percussion section, at least, with no mixing or mastering done to it. So. Like the timpanis in particular sound pretty realistic. And then there are 3 more tracks here, which are basically like these one-off incidental effects tracks. This is a reverse cymbal whoosh that I've shown before how to make. It's literally just a reverse cymbal. And you get that kind of... And then here is like a couple of impact sounds, so... I think that is actually just from a sample pack that I have of just like splashy FX kicks, and then this is like that's like a sub drop from one of my reactor synths, and you don't really, I don't know, kind of, you don't hear it, but you kind of sort of feel it, I suppose. And it's like, yeah, at this point, with all of these, with most of these like Final Fantasy VII Nobuo Uematsu tracks, they're just basically, the whole arrangement is that long, but then it loops twice, basically. And pretty much my formula for these covers has been, for the first half, I want it to be like faithful for the most part, or less heavy and less detail, or like less of my own additional detail in the first half. And then when it gets to the second half is when I really start like going pretty nuts and like adding different variations, more layers, and just like heavying up what's going on, basically. So that's pretty much the formula of like all these tracks. And yeah, I just find that these like little effects here do a thing to establish the reset of that loop, so that you know that it's going to kind of get a bit heavier this time around, psychologically, in a sort of subtle way, hopefully. So then you've got the 5-string bass MIDI, and I always kind of like program bass parts and stuff with my acoustic drums before I even bother getting it out of the case and recording it. Again, I just really like programming things as MIDI because it's just, I listen differently when I'm programming it in here compared to when I'm actually like playing the instrument. I find it really helps for knowing if my ideas are even going to work before I bother to try and record it, if that makes sense. So the sound from this, let me show you, is again, it's just a Logic sampler instrument, and this doesn't really matter because I'm going to replace it later anyway, but just to show the one that I think is best for this, it's the sampler bass, electric bass, and I like session bass, and I've got Neural DSP parallax on that just to make it sound like a, you know, sort of driven metalcore sort of vibe. I kind of use this as my, this is like my tab basically, so once I've sort of, with the drums, so yeah, it's basically from that I'll then learn the bass part and record it in on a real bass, which improves the sound massively. Moving down to this chunk of tracks here that are all in orange. These are the synth tracks, and basically what's going on here, just to quickly explain it, it's all the kind of, I think, the hookiest and catchiest parts of the strings and brass section from the original track, and what I've essentially done is rearrange these parts and condense them down for 3 synth players. So I'm kind of trying to make what a whole brass section and a whole string section are doing, emulating that with 3 people, and it's like, I'm not sure if you'll hear it, but we haven't necessarily got all the melodies that all, and it's like all the call and response, but I think we've got the most important ones in there. And the other thing is, like, even at this stage I'm trying to think about the logistics of how we would actually play the song live. For example, each keyboardist, I think, would have like, we often have like 2 keyboards each, for example, and you've got to think about the logistics of somebody being able to get their hands, you know, from one place to another quickly enough. And in some cases with these melodies, the way it's arranged, it's like that's actually really fucking difficult, and you need a larger orchestra or people to kind of help you with that. I've arranged the parts so that it gives each other sort of time and rests to kind of stop and then come back in. And like, for example, if somebody has to stop playing a melody, like a lead synth, to get to the keys part, somebody else in the band takes over that line from them, and I think that way you kind of get this interesting kind of call and response thing happening. Mainly using a synth called FabFilter 1, and it's just on like a sawtooth setting, just to kind of give it that, like, I think it's still video gamey, but I think that that kind of synth sound can also make it kind of sound kind of square pushery or 3-Chat Tigers-esque, and I think that blends together really well with like the heavy guitars and all of that kind of nonsense, right? So it sounds appropriate to what the strings and brass were doing originally, but it now kind of fits in a context for like a smaller rock band, I guess. So Next down here are these green guitar tracks, and basically these are like my demo or like rough recordings. I kind of do an initial pass in this MIDI project just to sort of like try out some ideas and see if they sound any good. So yeah, guitar tones for this are all coming from Neural DSP plugins, and you've got this, this sort of rhythm track, which is like, this is what Adam's playing in the video, basically these two Eleanor tracks here that are double tracked. Yeah, again, so this riff is like, it's incorporating various different parts of the original arrangement amalgamated for guitar, right? So it's like there's parts from the brass, so that like that's in there, but then there's also like the synth lead parts are now sort of incorporated on the guitar as like a gently lower pitched metal riff. So it's kind of like trying to emulate different parts of that larger orchestral arrangement, but just on the one instrument essentially. Yeah, again, sort of the vibe that I'm going for with that is to kind of sound like basically a bit like Architects or The Fall of Troy, and yeah, just kind of stuff like that essentially. So next two tracks below that are My Parts, and this is like a lead tapping riff. Again, it's inspired by The Fall of Troy and Architects, again, that kind of shit. But I thought this part isn't actually in the original song at all, and I've just made it up and put it in here. But what it's doing is it's obviously like emulating what the main top line melody for each section is doing, and it's like, I think it's hopefully like it's not too intrusive and distracting, or like doesn't get in the way of the original song, but kind of helps it, still further cements it in this new context of like, I guess like, I don't know what we call it, math rocky metalcore bullshit, I guess. And then the next two tracks here are my kind of djenty guitar tracks, right? And these are using Archetype Petrucci again, because it's got that transpose function in it, so I can basically turn my 6-string guitar into what is ostensibly an 8-string, or get that kind of baritone guitar sound. And this riff is basically, it's just doing exactly what Adam's playing, and John on the bass. As I mentioned earlier, yeah, the second time this big chorus happens, I essentially just want it to get heavier, and a way to do that is just to then layer in this guitar djenty part. And I think as a performance, maybe it's kind of cool because, like, hang on, if I delete that, because that's not meant to be how it is. For the first half of the song, I'm playing lead synth, and I'm doing most stuff on keyboards, and then it's just quite fun for me to be able to change what instrument I'm playing mid-song. So once you get to this section, I can then start joining on guitar, basically. And just to kind of further illustrate what happens there, because we don't have enough members or enough people in the band to play all the parts live, essentially what happens is that synth part that I was playing gets transferred to my little pocket piano synth that I've shown before, and then that is playing the lead line for the parts where I'm playing it on guitar. So it's kind of, it is still happening live, but obviously the MIDI is being sent to a synth, and it's just taking care of it for me for the bits where I'm using both hands to play guitar. And just to give you a little idea of what that sounds like. Yeah, so it's basically just giving it a little bit more aggression and a bit more impact on this second version of this chorus riff, I suppose. I think I've been doing that a lot. So yeah, like without it, and with it. Obviously that's meant to be emulating the whole... So yeah, now it's just... I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. And then the remainder of these tracks, all of these here, are basically these are the original strings and brass parts, right, arranged, and they live pretty quietly in the mix, quite quiet. So that is like the janky MIDI sound, but I've, instead of using, some of the Logic default things are okay, but you can see that I've like replaced some of these instruments with other, I've replaced these instruments with other like slightly better sounding software instruments basically. Spitfire Audio's Labs collection has got some really good stuff in it, so the... And yeah, all of these sort of like layered together underneath these synths, so it's quite subtle. Yeah, you can just kind of hear that like they're behind the synths, but they kind of fatten everything up a little bit. And then yeah, you've got the same kind of thing going on here, so. But yeah, that's a good trick. Often it's just like layering a few like software instrument patches together that are doing the same thing can actually make them sound pretty fat. So, for example, that strings part, for example, if I just grab that. Yeah, on its own, it's obviously not really that great. Or it might be like, okay, if you put a bunch of compression and stuff on it, but yeah, it just sounds quite like MIDI, I guess, and fake. But yeah, just putting a few more layers on that, I think, can kind of help make it sound a lot better, and a bit of reverb, of course. Something like Valhalla Vintage Verb is always nice to have. So pretty much all of this will end up as backing tracks in my Ableton project, right? So the rest of it is all stuff that we're actually going to play for real on real instruments, and we'll have to learn it as a band. But all of this stuff kind of sits in the Ableton project, and it's something that we would play to in a live context, just kind of like to fatten out the actual parts that we're playing. But yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards like, I'm trying to use backing tracks in this project as little as possible, so doing most of the heavy lifting by actually doing it on real instruments and having to learn stuff for real is kind of mostly what I'm doing with this project basically. Once I'm basically happy with like how I've got everything sounding and recorded in my arrangement, I then basically convert this project into audio, and then I start my mix project file. So for example, yeah, the drums I would bounce out as an individual file, and then I would go through and do the tambo, toms, timps, and just, yeah, every track becomes its own audio file, or some things get grouped and some down together. Then I basically move over to my mix project. Okay, this is my my final mix file, my final mix project in Logic for Battle Theme. I'm doing another voiceover here because, unfortunately, again, this is old footage that I've recorded that I'm going to have to narrate over. But yeah, essentially this part of my process is like, once I'm happy with everything from the Ableton project, I convert it all to audio, and then I put it in here in a blank session. So some of those software instruments and stuff can be quite a drain on the CPU. Just to make sure I've got my full CPU power kind of like available to me for adding more plugins to do mixing, processing and stuff like that, I've just committed everything to audio. Although the only things that stay as MIDI are the addictive drums part, and that's so that I can open up addictive drums and still kind of tweak the drum mix and stuff quite late into the day. So that's something that I haven't committed to. I still have the Neural DSP plugins active in this session on the DI, bass and guitar tracks, and that enables me to still tweak the tones and not necessarily like commit to them because they've not been bounced to audio. So I can still kind of tweak those things down the line, right? And admittedly with this project I'm not doing a huge amount of processing to anything individually, so there's basically no EQ or compression or anything happening on individual tracks for the most part, which obviously looks a bit weird for a mix, but I have done some, I always route things to bus groups and do a little bit of processing, but there's really not a lot going on in this one, and in this instance most of the kind of like mix stuff that you're hearing is actually just happening on the master channel. So I pretty much put a bunch of plugins on the stereo out and apply it to everything at once rather than doing so much individual work, and I found that with these tracks, I've kind of been able to get away with it just because what I've recorded already sounds like really good. There's less of a need to fix things because they already sound kind of good, which would be different if I'd recorded the drums entirely acoustically and real. There'd be a lot of kind of like work to do on those raw mic recordings to sound as good as it would do, basically, but because of what I've used, it's just kind of negated that. It's quite an interesting thing. And yeah, you can see in this project I've also added sounds from the original track that I managed to source authentically off of my EMU Proteus 2000. So for example, that like trashy kind of sound that you can hear in the original is here, and I've actually sourced that without nicking it from the original game, basically. So yeah, I think that's kind of my USP possibly with this, but I think that's kind of cool. Now, yeah, obviously as I get into this more, unfortunately, my this mix session is, I did this on my old Mac, which is a 2012 iMac, which has recently pretty much died. It really can't handle doing a screen capture whilst playing the mix file in real time with all the plugins. As you can see, the CPU just craps out, and it's really, I just basically can't record it much or show you much of this in detail, which kind of sucks. So from now on, I'm going to be doing everything on my new Mac M1, because it will actually be able to handle it, and I'll be able to show you stuff in more detail. But yeah, basically at the moment that's what's going on. You can sort of see a little bit of my master bus there, so it looks like quite a lot, but all of these plugins are kind of doing small things incrementally that add up. And yeah, the Amber EQ is basically just doing a lot of like top end EQ. There's a bit of compression and then some limiting and clipping, but there's not really a huge amount going on. But I'll go into this all in more detail in a separate video, basically. Right, so I've just nipped into my Ableton project, which is the full live Ableton project for the Final Fantasy VII album. And you can see it's literally every track is arranged in here. But if I go back to the session view, I'll just give you a quick tour of basically what's going on with my setup. So I've got a bunch of groups here. So this is my instruments group, and you can see I've got some stuff on it. Good old beat repeat. I won't be able to show you what that does at the moment. But basically, if I open that up, there's a bunch of tracks in here. Right, and this first one, which is called LX61, pertains to my... So that's just my keyboard, right? So this track just corresponds to everything that's happening on my MIDI keyboard. If I go into that, you see I've got an instrument rack, and these are all the plugins and every synth that I use for the whole, the entire set, right? So these are all the instruments that are going to appear in all the songs, and you can basically see that some of them are off and some of them are on. And through the power and the beauty of automation, I've basically got this all set up so that, for example, if I click Under the Rotting Pizza, you can see there that everything just changed to give me... and if I, for example, change back to Shinra Inc., or let's change to another song. So it's pretty useful because basically, yeah, whenever I start a particular song, I know that my keyboard and all of its effect settings and stuff have basically set themselves to exactly where I need them to be. See, you can hear that that's got delay on it there. And now I've got a Rhodes sound that has no delay on it, so it's just really, really useful for having everything ready. And because I'm using quite a lot of kit, it's just saving my brain a lot of headache, like remembering to turn certain things on and off. So I think that's pretty useful. And that's happening basically on every instrument that I've got in the project, right? So moving on to the next track is the guitar, and this is my guitar channel. And yeah, similar again, where I'm using an audio effect rack, and I've got these three... I've got all my Neural DSP guitar plugins loaded up because I use different plugins for different tones live, and you can see that these turn themselves off and on at different points when I need them to. So for example, Battle Theme, because I'm going for the heavy tones, you can see I've switched to Archetype Petrucci for that song. And obviously within the songs as well, there's more like automation happening. So for example, I might have like a dry wet kind of turn itself up at a particular point in the track where I need it to. Or the transpose function will change itself when I want to have my 8-string pseudo 8-string guitar versus the normal 6-string. So it just offers a lot of kind of cool creative flexibility and fun stuff. So you can also automate, obviously, for when the guitar's not in use. I obviously don't want it feeding back or making it any sound. So again, in certain songs where I don't want the guitar to be heard, it can just be off and then it comes on specifically when I need it to, which I think is pretty sick. Let me show you actually. So yeah, for example, if I change to a different song, like Lurking in the Darkness, and yeah, and for example, so it can't possibly make any noise. I can't trip myself up by turning the volume knob down and forgetting that I've done that. Yeah, that can happen. So yeah, for me, that's just like, I find that awesome and really, really useful. So there you can hear a bit of the 8-string action engaging itself. So I think that's pretty sick. Then basically this next track here is Pocket Piano. Yeah, these are all the notes that are getting sent to my synth, and yeah, I won't be able to show that right now. I'll do this in a separate video, but you can see, yeah, for example, keys part of The Nightmare Begins, the whole thing just gets sent to my Pocket Piano, and that basically means that I can like do some messing about with that to kind of get some synthesized sounds at certain points if I want to. At any point in the song I can kind of turn that up and get something out of it. Pad perks is a bunch of drum machine sounds that I have assigned to my launchpad. So I can kind of trigger those, you know, whenever. I thought there was some more in here, but oh, here we are, launchpad drums. Oh yeah, I've also got a bunch of like... And yeah, like, so I can like, you know, I can hit a pad on the launch pad and that will actually, you know, trigger in real time, which is pretty fun. Next up is Reactor Effects. So I have this running at all times in my project, and again, I have this assigned to my Korg Nano control, so I can kind of turn that up whenever, and I can do some like nice little kind of like ambient delay fillers and stuff like that, which is quite a nice thing to have to sort of fiddle with. And then yeah, this section here, this group, is all the backing tracks, basically just everything that is in the original song, so I can come in and turn on the live drums and then yeah, because it's obviously all programmed exactly to specific BPMs and it's all on the grid like this, this basically enables the possibility to send a MIDI clock out of Ableton to, for example, my visuals guy who's doing lights. Pretty easy to get a MIDI clock into other programs for visuals to get those synchronized and, you know, doing some tight stuff with the music. And that's all possible from, you know, a simple rig like this, which I think is pretty fucking sweet, right? Like it's my entire, basically my guitar rig, so it's like my guitar effects and my amp, it's my keyboard, synths, and like loads of stuff baked into the keyboard. And then I'm also able to kind of send click track out to a band, which I'll show you. Where are those? So these are my own in-ear monitoring tracks, right? So I've got the backing tracks and the feed of my own instruments, and I can set different levels for those for everybody else. So, you know, if somebody wants a little bit less of me, they can have less of me, and then down here is a group of recording tracks, and they basically just record everything happening live. So if I want to record, you know, a performance that I'm doing, I can just hit record and everything ends up on these tracks. So this way I'm basically able to like record my end of the live performance anyway within Ableton directly as audio, which I think is pretty cool. That's basically the live setup, or a general overview of it anyway. I think in another video I'm going to go into this in depth, and I'm going to show you how to basically set this up yourself, because I understand it probably looks like a little bit crazy when it's in this sort of mad Excel spreadsheet, as it were. It is obviously time consuming to set this up, but I find that like, once it's done, and it just makes the job of gigging and rehearsing like so fast, right? Because it's pretty much like I don't really have to spend ages dicking about setting up loads of equipment. It's all ready to go, and like when I'm playing as well, I don't have to worry about like, oh, I've got to remember to turn this effects pedal off, and then I don't have to remember like, oh, I've got to turn my guitar back up at this point. I've been playing keys and then I go to guitar and I've fucking forgotten to turn my guitar up and it's not making any sound and I look like a twat. Yeah, there's none of that with this. It's all just like perfectly orchestrated, and once it's done, and it becomes a joy. In future videos I'll be going a little bit more into detail about all of this stuff. I'll be using my Final Fantasy interpretation tracks to cover topics like making MIDI instruments sound not crap. I'll be going into the Proteus 2000 and specifically some of the cool authentic Final Fantasy sounds that I managed to get off of it without sampling from the original games. I'm also going to do a more in-depth breakdown about my mixing method and kind of how to make this stuff sound a little bit better for Spotify and Bandcamp and digital releasing and all the rest of it. And then yeah, I will get to a video about my entire live setup and kind of a detailed step-by-step breakdown of how you can make something like that yourself. If you can't wait for more, then you can hear my full Final Fantasy VII covers album right now, Cactuar Collections Disc 1, brackets FF7. Thank you very much for watching. I hope some of this has been either insightful, interesting, or just fun to look at. If there's anything that you'd like me to answer that I've not quite covered, do feel free to give me a shout in the comments or whatnot. And yeah, don't forget to just, you know, keep being yourself and just smashing it at life. Don't need to do anything else. You are absolutely killing it. Safe. Take it easy.